Military people, who was the how the frick did he pass basic training guy? Story 1. We had a guy we call Domestic Pepsi. His surname, Internicola. Get it? He was dumber than a bag of hammers. Why would you put a bunch of hammers in a bag? Anyway, one day we had a big inspection. Company commander inspecting. The commander eventually made his way to Domestic Pepsi and started asking questions about general Marine Corps knowledge. This recruit does not know, sir. This recruit does not know, sir. Sir, this recruit doesn't know. Finally, our commander asked him, "Son, you don't even know if you're alive, do you?" There was the longest pause following the question. Then a small, quiet, and incredibly confused voice replied, "Sir, this recruit does know that he's alive, sir." It's likely he actually had to think about it. In his small and intimidated head, he was probably going through all 7 of the facts he knew and seriously asked himself, "Am I alive?" The whole squad bay of hardened, nearly graduated Marine recruits and our drill instructors all burst into laughter. How he actually graduated, I have no idea. Yes, Marines are a bunch of crayon-eating morons, but Domestic Pepsi was the guy who would have choked to death on the paper sheaths on each crayon. I don't know, man. How can you really know anything? I personally think that we're all in a simulation, so would I say that I'm alive? Probably not. Story 2. This will get buried, but on my first day of Navy boot camp, we got off the bus and ran into the building, all lining up on in ranks. They gave us this speech about contraband, etc. They gave us an opportunity to throw away any contraband we had at that moment. One of the kids in the back walked up and threw away something. The recruit division commander, RDC, yelled, "Recruits, get back up here now." The kid walks back up and the RDC said, "What did you just put in here?" The kid mumbles something, and the RDC says, "Pick up what you just put in there and tell me what it is." The kid picks up something and says, "It's a pocket wussy, petty officer." The RDCs lost their mind on that one, but that wasn't the first time that night. During the in-processing phase, we all had to pee in a cup. If you got into the room and couldn't go for any reason, then you were sent back out into a larger room with your sweatshirt backward to signify you didn't go. I didn't have to go yet, so I was walking around the room, stopping at every fountain to get a drink. We weren't allowed to talk, just walk and drink. The same darn kid was walking just behind me with his sweatshirt backward and caught up to me. He said, "Dude, where's the RDC? I have to pee." I told him not to talk to me and sped up. On the other side of the room, I decided I could go now, so I walked to the line, and out of the corner of my eye, I see it. This kid is peeing in a freaking trash can. He ended up 3 spots behind me in line, and when he got into the room, the RDC asked him why his pants were wet. He said, "I couldn't find an RDC, and I had to pee so bad, I peed myself a bit. So I peed into the trash can." The look on that RDC's face was horrifying. They took him to another room, and I didn't see him the rest of the day, until we got into our in-processing barracks. That kid was amazingly stupid. He got sent back 3 times in boot camp, but I heard he graduated. Story 3. I've had the pleasure of serving with a few of those types. The 2 most memorable are, went through basic with this kid. This dude had literally never a day in his life prior done anything physical, ever. He had a permanent hunchback from sitting on the couch all his life. He was literally purple because his circulation sucked. His arms had the bat wings of an 80-year-old woman, and he, honest to God, had a waddle, which led to his unfortunate nickname of Turkey. He legitimately couldn't do 5 push-ups, a single sit-up. This dude couldn't even jump high enough to grab onto a pull-up bar, let alone do a pull-up. Failed every single physical training test we took. The drills actually called his mother, and the Army paid for her to fly out so she could give encouragement so maybe he would finally pass one. Homeslice still graduated with us because the drills couldn't be bothered to chapter him and wanted his gaining unit to take the flak instead. Second dude was a real special case. 100% a Gomer Pyle type of situation. Only a few peanuts rattling around the can. He got to us right around the same time as What Does the Fox Say was a big deal. He considered it his favorite song and sang it nearly constantly. He, honest to God, thought he was a cat and would lick himself and randomly meow at us. Dude was white as a ghost, but every other week he'd be repping a different gang, typically one that doesn't recruit white folk. His favorite was Latin Kings. I think he just liked yellow. We'd catch him staring at walls and stuff, completely zoned out. We got orders to deploy, and nobody wanted him with us. But sadly, he came along. Leadership took his firing pin and he guarded the DFAC for the whole department. As soon as we got back, he was chaptered for mental instability. A few of my guys are still Facebook friends with him, and according to him, he was freaking John Rambo himself overseas, single-handedly clearing buildings and stuff. Story 4. U.S. Army here. Thankfully, my story didn't make it out of basic, but dang, I would like to punch the recruiter that put her in square in the jaw. This girl was 5'2", probably weighed less than 90 pounds. She was so frail, she looked like she was going to snap under the weight of her lunch tray. She was given twice as much time to eat and twice as much food as the rest of us in an effort to put some weight on her. She never ate it, just poked it for 20 minutes, then threw it away. She was clearly developmentally disabled. Soldiers call each other the R word all the time as a joking insult. This wasn't the case. She was actually developmentally disabled. During reception, 1 to 2 weeks of in-processing before actual basic training starts, I had to teach her how to button her pants, lace her boots, and do her laundry. She was young, maybe 18. Her boyfriend was over 40. In reception, she would be on the phone with him every walking moment possible. She was caught on multiple occasions, furiously touching herself in the corner of the bay while on the phone with him. She couldn't understand that it was inappropriate. Once we shipped to actual training, she ended up in my company, but a different training platoon than me. She made it 4 weeks before they took her weapon away, because she wouldn't stop flagging people, accidentally aiming it at someone with it. Also, she could barely hold it up. The 9-pound M16A2, way too heavy for her. She got moved to the separation company around week 5, never saw her again. That was 9 years ago. I think about her sometimes and wonder if she's okay. Story 5. This guy was a student in aviation school while I was an instructor. He was a new soldier attending his technical school after basic. Apparently, he was on the autism spectrum, but functioned well enough for the Army. He was great at physical tasks. That's how he passed basic. He was also very intelligent in the classroom study. If he was directly instructed, he was fine. One day I found him in the hall between classrooms during a class session. He had taken a restroom break, but got sidetracked and was staring deeply into the ceiling fan. It took several attempts to get his attention. I had to touch his arm when he didn't respond to my approach, or call his name a few times. It happened a few times with other instructors until our supervisor addressed it with the division chief. It was decided after several medical consultations and meetings with the colonel that it wasn't safe to allow this student to proceed as a helicopter mechanic. It was ultimately a safety matter because he could get mesmerized by a spinning rotor on an airfield. Strangely, I saw him later on a deployment to Afghanistan. He was reclassified as an artillery soldier. This guy sounds like he was part cat. At least my cat likes to stare up at the ceiling fan sometimes and become hypnotized. Story 6. Had a kid at my first squadron, Air Force, who was quite possibly one of the dumbest, least self-aware people I've ever met. This kid either couldn't or wouldn't retain basic information, which was problematic, given that he was in the intelligence career field. At one point, he was presenting a brief about North Korea and claimed with a straight face that the capital city of North Korea was Bogota. For those keeping score, Bogota is the capital of Colombia. He tried very hard to project a redneck persona, and as part of this, bought massive bright red lifted truck with obnoxious redneck decal work. Anyone with half a brain could tell you he was struggling to pay for it on his measly E3 barracks rat pay. Eventually, he decided he didn't want to pay for the truck anymore, so he drove it into a lake one night and filed an insurance claim, then used the money to immediately buy a different vehicle. This was quickly uncovered by the police, and he was kicked out of the Air Force. To this day, I have no earthly idea who thought this kid could belong in military intelligence, or how he got through intel school. Story 7. At basic, we had a guy who did a version of the Christian Bale deep Batman voice for the entire time, and never took off his eye protection. Terrifying to be woken up by him for guard duty in the middle of the night. He would just loom over you and say your name while jabbing you violently with his hands. Apparently, his underwear eventually fused to his body because he didn't shower for weeks. The stench was miserable. From what I heard, he was put on suicide watch a couple of weeks after basic, but he passed basic. Story 8. Getting immunization needles. I overheard the nurse asking about medical family history. My family has a history of hypothermia. During field training with blank rounds, had 2 negligent discharges, ended up being charged for both, threw their rifle down and started cursing black magic on the rifle. Story 9. Worked with a United States Air Force major long ago who'd been in grade for eons because he couldn't give a briefing without scratching his balls. Only the Vietnam War was keeping him in service. Eventually, he went on an orientation tour of a Minuteman site and fell into a hole. When he got out of the hospital, they retired him. Story 10. Honestly, it was me. Joined the Marines at 17 as an artilleryman. Didn't know at the time that I had high-functioning autism. I could follow instructions well enough, so I got through basic without any real trouble, but I just didn't have much common sense in my head at the time. I didn't like to socialize and was very awkward beyond simple order-following things. I got messed with to no end and wound up beating the snot out of myself from the stress during Fleet Week. Eventually, we got deployed to Iraq as civil affairs, and I was put in administrative and office duties, and found I was especially good at office work. In the end, it was a positive experience, though. I was forced into having a lot more social interactions than I would have as a civilian, and I was able to work on things like that a lot more than I would have if I had not joined. I still had a lot of trouble after leaving the Marines because it was right at the start of the recession, but I would have been even worse off otherwise. Story 11. The lad who shat himself and didn't want to let people know, so threw his poopy kit with an actual log inside the trousers into the group wash. Freaking rotter. The 2 females and 2 males who got caught fraternizing in the briefing room the night before pass out and somehow managed to get day zeroed for it. The lad who tried to give himself a neck shave and buzzed a racing stripe 5 inches up the back of his head. The lad who broke his nose trying to impress NCOs with a backflip. The lad who was going for gunner who couldn't for the life of him figure out how to sling a rifle. Spent 5 hours practicing, crying and stuff. Couldn't hack it, and after passing out, eventually months after everyone else, got kicked out for drugs. Story 12. Fireman was making yakisoba noodles on deployment. He asked when to get the hot water, and someone pointed him at the coffee maker, which had one of those red spigots on the side. Instead of using the hot tap, he opened the noodles and dumped them into the coffee maker, where the grounds go, and replaced the coffee pot with his empty noodle bowl. People would typically stop him, but we were like 6 months into deployment, and he was our only source of entertainment. I have about a dozen of these stories. He is literally the dumbest person I've ever met, and I spent a lot of time wondering how he's still alive. Story 13. We had one guy in my basic training platoon that was a walking safety hazard. Among other things, he managed to fall out of a first-floor window, got a quarter of the pontoon's packs, the squad's packs stolen during an exercise because he fell asleep watching them, fired his rifle on full auto into the camp with training rounds, luckily, because he thought he saw a wild pig rifling through our stuff, and, to cap it all off, put a live round between the drill instructor's feet at the firing range. He passed basic with the rest of us. The only guy that failed because he deserted halfway through, although he did get a mark in his file that he was unsuited for any rank with any kind of responsibility. Story 14. Had a girl who would hit herself in the face when she got upset, like full hard slaps. It was unnerving to watch. She would also hide candy and food from the mess deck and eat it alone in the head bathroom. Our racks, beds, were next to each other, separated by a thin piece of metal with small holes punched in it for air circulation. One night I was reading a book, and she asked me how I liked it. I asked her how she knew what I was reading, and she said she was watching me through the holes in the partition. This girl made it through the recruiter, MEPS, where they do a psych evaluation, and boot camp. Clearly someone dropped the ball. Story 15. After basic training, I was at tech school in a squadron that trains air traffic controllers, airfield managers, command posts, and aerospace control and warning systems. Had 3 people I wonder how they got past basic. The person who tossed a whole unopened box of Hot Pockets into a microwave, Hot Pockets, set it for 5 minutes and left their dorm room. The person who got second-degree burns when they tried to iron their uniform while wearing it. The girl who would hiccup, sounded like she was trying to imitate a raptor from Jurassic Park, in formation, or whenever people weren't paying attention to her. Story 16. I met so many. One of my soldiers never passed a PT test. Not once. Not in basic, not in the real army, never. We need the personnel, and we knew he wouldn't pass, so we stopped testing him. Same guy wouldn't shower, spent 2 weeks in 100-degree desert, and he didn't shower when we got back. Then there was the guy who was just plain dumb. Like he had a spare tire in his car and a flat tire on his car, and the reason he hadn't changed them was because he couldn't figure out where the lug nuts on the flat tire were. Story 17. We basically had a Gomer from Full Metal Jacket who, during a few times in basic training, it was actually concerning, was going to red rum all of us from the abuse he received. I, similarly to Joker, was assigned to unfrick this recruit, which unfortunately I was unable to do regardless of the instruction, advice, or positive reinforcement offered. I'm convinced he was mentally unable to handle what was going on. He still contacts me about once a year, 14 years later. Story 18. Anyone who ever lost a weapon in the field. I've seen it happen a couple of times. You feel sorry for them because of the consequences they have to face, but at the same time, they totally deserve it for the hell they brought upon the whole unit.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.